Do not be afraid. You will witness a miracle.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Backlot Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel, and today I'm joined by my co-host Tanner Dykstra, who has never once forced me to make a decision. I swear. Today we're here to talk about Heretic, the new A24 horror movie, starring Hugh Grant. And we're going to give you our thoughts, but if you have seen this movie and want to talk to us about it, you can join our Discord, which is linked in the description. Also, you can leave a comment about your thoughts on this movie. You can subscribe to the channel for more reviews in the future. But Tanner, Heretic time, baby.
Yes.
What do you think of the movie?
I really like this movie. I was having a really good time with it. I was hooked on it from the trailers, obviously, as many people were from the Hugh Grant performance, and they sort of teasing out the premise of this, dealing with some Mormon missionaries knocking on Hugh Grant's door, and he has a devious plan in store for them. Yeah. And I think Hugh Grant is really good. I think that where this film starts out with its themes and what it's trying to explore is very interesting. I don't think all those things come to bear as well as I might have wished, but as a horror thriller film, I think it's also very good. I don't think it drops that bar even for a second. So I had a really good time with this. What did you think, Tucker?
Yeah, I echo everything you said, and I want to start my compliment of this movie because I also do agree with your criticism, which is that it doesn't quite carry its core focused idea of breaking down religious control. It kind of does, but it has this really heavy focus.
The note that it ends on is not very satisfying to me. Is what I'll say.
Yeah, and we'll get into that as we break down the movie further. But I do think that at face value, at base level, this is a very well made thriller film.
Yes,
it is a horror film in a few moments, but it also does, I think, subvert the horror movie genre, which I think is kind of more, it from the trailers, it seemed like it was going to sort of just dive into all sorts of crazy shit, but it doesn't, and I think that's a good thing, because ultimately this ends up being more of a thriller, and it's the ways in which it subverts the horror movie genre that I think make it really stand out, and then it's boosted up in terms of making it feel very distinct by the first 2/3 of the movie, which are really focused on very unique themes. But the one thing that I really think that I take away from this movie, other than the themes, which I think are the core thing, is that Hugh Grant's character, obviously his performance, which we'll get into, but his character as the antagonist of this film is very, very different from any other crazy guy with a plan sort of thing.
Sure.
Because he's chill as a cute. He's cool as a cucumber.
He is cool.
He's cute, cool as some sort of
he never
insert
really
miscellaneous vegetable here.
Loses his head in any given
No,
scene.
he doesn't. And he also is never, until the line finally snaps, he's never physical. He's very hands off. No, sorry, I'm not gonna touch you. Don't worry about that. He is presenting this as chill as he can possibly be, and it gives this movie a totally unique vibe. You never really feel like he's going to be a crazy physical threat. You never feel like something's going to pop out at you. You're just tense because you don't know what's going to happen next. And I think that's a really, really creative and clever way to create tension in a movie that's really just about standing in a room or sitting on a couch and talking.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a very good point, Tucker, because let's start with Hugh Grant. I mean, he is the draw for this movie. He is the the only face on the poster. He is the basically the entire marketing campaign is watch Hugh Grant be evil for a bit, shall we?
Yeah.
And that's something that he's done in some films in recent past. Dungeons and Dragons, Operation Fortune. I think he's the villain in The Gentleman, and I'll say that this is his best performance since Paddington 2. And which is also, funnily enough, the closest performance he's given to his performance in Heretic.
Sure.
This sort of devious...
He's being typecast.
Mustache-twirling, sort of villainous character. And obviously, these are two vastly different performances from vastly different films. But it really surprised me and, really heartened me to the fact that, for once in the last 5 years, Hugh Grant is not sleepwalking through his performance in a movie. And it just goes to show that he's a very talented performer when he pours himself, when he's really grabbed or hooked by the material. And this is absolutely a character that would hook or grab any actor to that regard, because as you said, he is a horror thriller villain who is trapping two young women in his home or whatever.
Yeah. We've seen this before.
We've seen this before, and usually any actor would approach that with like, oh, and he's gonna be a physical threat, and the implications of the threat that he poses to these women. But the casting of Hugh Grant brings a very different sort of energy to that, to the point where he is sort of he becomes much more of an intellectual threat or a question of what does he have in store for us, rather than like how is he going to attack or kill us in any certain way. That is embedded in there, but Hugh Grant is not a physical actor. He's not a physical threat or presence, really. He is has this history of being like a charismatic sort of performer, who is much more his words are much more powerful than his actions are, and that carries over to the character of Mr. Reed in this film.
Yeah, and I'd love to know from the inception of this film if he was the person that they had in mind creating this character, because you can see the way in which his performances of the past have been more about sweet-talking people and being very charming, and converting that into something that is a thriller, is a horror film. You can see the match working perfectly there, and obviously it really does in this film. I think you say he's not a physical performer, but it's because he's not lunging, he's not moving a lot, but it's the close-ups on his face and the way he's holding his hands and the way he sidles through the frame that are very subtle but add a ton of depth to this character that really make him an appealing, charismatic guy. When he's delivering these monologues, you're like, man, this guy's really thought this through. And it's because the dialogue, I think, deserves a massive praise here from all three of the actors. We're starting to get into the girls next, but all three of the actors, all the dialogue here is so natural. They're delivering these lines, they're stumbling over them a little bit, they're filling in each other's gaps as things go awry, and especially with Hugh Grant, watching him deliver this monologue that the character has very clearly practiced a lot, and he's sort of planned for all these contingencies, and so when he stumbles, and then you like think back and then you're like, oh man, maybe he even planned to stumble. Like he has such this like 20 steps ahead of you in the game mentality that I think really shows through in the way that he like flexes his mouth and like tilts his eyebrows, and it's just every moment that his face is on screen, I'm like, this guy knows something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to your point of like, was it pre-planned that, what did the writers have him in mind when they were creating this character? It is a great question, because he has to carry that air, and it helps that he is like a British performer, and he has that like British intellectualism to his to his gait, to his performance, and in a lot of regards. But speaking of intellectualism, I wanted to talk next about a character or a performance in a character that really surprised me in the direction that they took her. That would be Sophie Thatcher's character, who is
Barnes, Sister Barnes,
and the other one is Paxton. Yes. Sister Barnes, who initially from the very outset is presented to us as like, she's not as into the whole dogma as her partner is, Sister Paxton. She carries a little bit of doubt on her face from the the opening minutes of this film. Essentially, she seems a little less, I don't know, bubbly or innocent or whatever than Paxton is. And that really comes to the forefront when, after delivering his his lecture on how religion is all about iteration and X and Y and Z, she's like, your premise is flawed. Like, you present these things as truthful, but like, you didn't factor in this. You say that Judaism, the original religion, has fallen by the wayside because it's less popular, not even taking into account the Holocaust, or one of these guys has a freaking bird head or whatever. Like, the way that she brings out essentially like the debate of the film is very interesting, and something that really surprised me, and something that was like, I was like, okay, we're going a little bit more intellectual than I initially thought we would be with this film.
The script is fascinating here, and the way that it's paced out in terms of revealing things and taking the tense atmosphere, the horror setting, further and further. There are 3 main locations in this film that I think you can kind of cleanly cut first act, second act, third act, and I think that's smart in that, and I think also the script matches that very well in first act is we're sitting in the living room. We're just sort of introducing each other. We're getting to know a little bit of backstory, which is it technically really is a sequence about exposition and who are these characters and what are their histories, whether that's real or fake, whether they're lying or being truthful. And then, but it's delivered so well that when you're getting these lines and Hugh Grant is like, well, let me just ask a question. Like it's presented in this way that feels very, very natural. Like I'm not like, oh, they're like shoving the exposition down my throat. So there's that sequence, which is tense and uncomfortable because these girls don't really know who he is. We don't really know who he is. We don't know what is actually going on. I mean, we've seen the trailers. We know something's going to go awry. But it's tense because it's uncomfortable. And then you get the study room sort of church area as a second act, which is much more about the intellectual debate that was started in the first act. And he's got all these contraptions, and this environment is really complex, and there's all these paintings and statues, and that ratchets up the tension because you're like, what are these doors? Who is this guy? What plan does he have? And the script again matches that because in this sequence it's much more about that debate. This is where I think that's the best part of the movie.
Yes,
frankly, is that
I mean his whole lecture, his whole soliloquy, whatever you want to call it, about like religion and monopoly, and then taking it to like the song being iterated upon, and that whole situation, and then he turns that into like, I believe that there is a truer, deeper religion than that, which of course is subverted later into the very end of the film, which we'll get to. That whole thing is like, that's the best part of the movie. That's where it like really surprises you. That's where again the Hugh Grant,
it has its own identity in the strongest of its own identity in that middle section. Because then there's the third act where they go to the basement and it's a very dark area, and we have the prophet, and it's more of a traditional horror area. People trapped in a room. How are we going to get out? There's some sort of fucked up presence there, and that I think is where the movie kind of loses itself a little bit. I don't think it's bad, but I do think that it feels like it's falling into more traditional trappings in this last section of the film. But I struggle to balance on my mind if I would have preferred it totally stayed away from that or not, because I do think that in order to keep ratcheting up the tension, there needs to be some sort of the darkness and the weird things going on that are a little more visually overt. But and then we go even deeper past that at the end of the third act. But the script and the pacing and the tone and the setting changes consistently over the course of the film, and I think it all matches very well.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the dungeon, the second act, the second setting of the film is still super. I was still hooked in from that, from that 10-15 minutes, that 10-minute sequence that preceded it. And I was like, okay, so what is this? I mean, Sophie Thatcher's character had kind of put together this is an experiment of sorts. And we're trying to do the match, and then you have the classic thing of like somebody from the outside is at the door, so we're trying to get their attention, that kind of thing.
And they're really well constructed sequences.
Yeah, they are. They're very well done. I mean, these guys, Scott Beck and Brian Woods have not directed a film that we've seen outside of 65, which I would say doesn't quite match the intensity of these sequences. But they wrote A Quiet Place, which obviously has a lot of these kinds of sequences in it. So there's that. I think they have a knack for this kind of taut thriller, contained thriller kind of situation. And then, do we do spoilers for Heretic? I mean, I don't really know. But this is
quickly. I want to divert. I want to divert back to why this third act works so well for me. It's because the first two acts felt so unique, and they established this unique tone and this debate, and so there are still trickles of that happening throughout the third act of the film, which is visually and aesthetically and location-wise more traditional in terms of its identity. But again, I've seen a young woman of faith trapped in a dark basement many times in my day. Not in real life, but in film.
I was gonna say, what about in movies, Tucker?
But this worked a lot better for me, and the reason why I'm still just as engaged as you were is because Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton are incredibly well acted. They're very likable. They have strong identities. Both of these young actresses are just delivering great performances. I mean, I came into this thinking it was going to be, Hugh Grant delivering a commanding performance, which he does, and I think it probably is my favorite performance of his. But I'm very pleasantly surprised to say this is a 3-hitter trio of performances. I think all 3 of them do a fantastic job in the way that Paxton and Barnes play off each other, and it's clear that they know each other well, but there still are some elements of their history or personality that they're not quite used to, probably just because they're work friends, I guess.
Yeah.
Ultimately, but it creates a scenario where I'm bought into wanting to see them survive, and the way that we got to talk about this. Every character in this movie is smart. This is one of the smartest horror movies I've ever seen.
This is what I was trying to get to with spoilers for Heretic. We're going to talk about like what happened transitioning into the third act, which is where it really sort of diverts from what you've seen in the trailers, essentially. Yeah. So the character that has been positioned as like the smart one, the leader, Sophie Thatcher's sister Barnes. Barnes, thank you. Sister Barnes is killed. Hugh Grant
and Sister Noble.
She slashes her, or Hugh Grant slashes her throat, which is really comes out of nowhere because it's the first time that he's like stepped into his experiment in a certain way, and you're like,
and it's the only time he's physically interacting.
Exactly, and you're like, oh, okay, now we've taken like the person who we know is going to question him out of the situation, out of the scenario, and of course. Sister Paxton, Chloe East, picks up that torch, essentially. She is not as well versed in this, but she picks it up quite quickly, I think. And that's when they get into, like, the how did he do the prophet thing? Because there's a sequence with the prophet, she eats the blueberry pie, she dies, she comes back to life, and then tells them about the vision she saw of the afterlife.
And we get a Saw type...
It's very like, Saw. That's what I was thinking of that in the movie. I was like, this is very Saw, in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, she sort of figures out how that whole situation went down. That is what we're to believe actually happened, with the switching out the different bodies and whatever. But also there is a moment where I was like, oh, we might be going like crazy here, when Hugh Grant cuts open the arm of Sister Barnes and pulls out an implant and puts it on the table, and he's like, listen. She is a plant. She is an android, okay? And only you and I are real people. We can, if we die, we can transcend to the other side of the simulated veil that is separating the reality and unreality. And she's like, I think it's just a birth control chip, pal.
Yeah. That's a really interesting moment because I think it plays into all of the strengths of what this film has set up thematically and with all of its characters. Is he takes this crazy turn that, as Paxton explains it, and I think that he's probably right, this is him backpedaling, trying to make up for the errors that he has made in delivering this experiment and capturing the young women, pushing them to either kill themselves or imprison themselves and believe in what he's doing. And I think that's probably true. But he is so quick on his toes. He has such a vast knowledge of different theologies and different possible permutations of what the world could be that he's able to pull this out of his pocket and like deliver the whole thing and like draw the diagram and like so he's doing a great job there. But Paxton, I think, with the relationship that we've seen her have with Barnes and the way that they've talked about birth control and sex at the beginning of the film and talked a little bit about we heard Barnes talk about science and how she understands why the prophet might have come back to life because it stops your heart just for a little bit and like the little spasm and all this stuff. There is like this scientific tinge to it, but because Paxton is like at least mildly familiar, even as a Mormon, with birth control things, and me as a real life human being who's well, not that Mormons aren't real life human beings, but as someone who's not Mormon is like, hey. That's an IUD. Like I'm not stupid. It's a great moment because it pushes you to challenge like what do I believe? Like I'm pretty sure that's an IUD, but this movie could be going anywhere
right, exactly. I mean,
because he's delivering it so well.
The whole movie is obviously about like why do you believe the things you believe. The whole film, as it's structured, as we've been talking about, with the points and the refutations and the backpedaling and all that, is in itself like a religious debate spread out in across a vast crazy scenario. But then she calls him out and was like, "Guy, dude, it's just a birth control. It's an IUD." And he's like, "All right, you got me."
Yeah.
And then she's like, "The body's down there." And we go down to a deeper hatch and through some crazy doors with runes and stuff on them. And then the bike lock from the beginning of the movie is on the door, and she's like, "You always expected for me to get here." Again, very much like a Saw thing, leading us down the road of Hugh Grant has always been, 10, 20 steps ahead of them. Mm-hmm. And then that's when we land on the final Monopoly space, as it were. We've returned. We've hit go. Will we collect $200? I don't think so, because the note it ends on is that the one true religion is control. I was like, sure. Not exactly how I was hoping we'd end with this. Not as deep and insightful as I was hoping the film would go, or even off the rails, as we were maybe indicating with the veil of simulacrum or whatever. And he's just like, "Yeah, I'm a crazy guy. I'm a crazy guy who wanted to start my own religion and cult and everything, and I keep these women in cages." I was like, okay. I mean, it's pretty fucked up, obviously, but I don't know. I just
personally, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that, Hugh Grant. I'm just saying. And then she tricks him, slices his throat, goes up through the thing, and they have that little final chase and everything. And then the movie's over, and she kind of escapes, or does she? I don't know. But I don't know. Tucker, what did you think of the third act? Because I'm not crazy about it, and maybe it's just because my expectations and the ratcheting up had worked so well for me previous to that.
Yeah, again, it's good. It's fine. It's built on characters that I'm interested in from the antagonist and the protagonist perspective. It is a sensical building up of what happens. It's not like there's this totally hard shift where it's like, well, that came out of nowhere. It's like, okay, well, they explain it a little bit, and you can feel that something's been going on. Yeah, it's not out of the world of the film, but I think that you're right. It's my least favorite part of the movie because it's the part that feels the least distinct.
Yeah.
Again, it's a well-delivered, well-crafted, well-acted, relatively traditional horror sequence. I mean, we've seen Don't Breathe. We've seen Barbarian. Yes. We've seen these movies that have the basement where something's weird going on, and a person is trying to deliver some sort of experiment or for their own nefarious needs. But I think that I don't exactly know what else I would have wanted, which is why I'm not going to critique the movie for this, because I think that it's smart that on a thematic level, this movie takes religious debate, which is the core theme of the film that I want to talk a little bit more about, and boils it down to a couple of really compelling nuggets that are presented through a thriller horror structure. And then the fact that it ends there, and it ends on the note of control, isn't necessarily the most revelatory ending or reveal, but I think it's a good bow on top of all this of the themes of, because what I really think this movie is about the debate that people have in real life of faith. It's very obvious that especially with the belief and disbelief doors, which I haven't even mentioned up to this point, but that's what the movie's going for. But I think the whole challenge of the movie is how challenging it can be through all the belief structures that are out there to choose the one that you believe in, even without all the full evidence, and knowing that there's going to be something potentially bad waiting for you on the other side if you choose wrong. And I think that is a really interesting way to visualize and structure a film around this very important theme that most people in the world deal with at some point in their lives, a very universal thing, regardless of your place in the world. And the fact that the movie ends on that the true religion is control, or that technically all religions sort of boil down to wanting to control people in some way, I mean, I think is true. I mean, that kind of confirms my own worldview, so I guess I'm okay with that.
This is my thing.
But the interesting thing about the movie is that it doesn't necessarily take a specific stance onto what religion is right, what religion is wrong. It presents all these. We have our protagonists are the religious characters. They present rebuttals to his anti-theistic tirade that he's going on. So I think that it's a smart screenplay in that it doesn't necessarily alienate any particular religious viewpoint. And depending on your perspective, depending on what you know about these debates, you're able to sort of take and grasp and understand things in a different way. And I think that's ultimately smart for a movie that's trying to make money.
Sure. Okay. Well, here's my thing about it is that like I was never under the impression that it was going to like endorse any one religious worldview. From the outset, It was very clear that Hugh Grant was like, religion's not real. All right? I mean, that was clear to me from the marketing and that
of course.
religion was is a control mechanism. I mean, that's why I think I felt disappointed that like that was his conclusion. That was he's tearing the curtain off, and he's like, surprise! Religion is a method to control the masses. It's the opioid of the masses. So I was like, yeah, like that was very clear and evidently your belief from the very beginning of your like lecture on iteration and everything like that. Like I knew that was inbuilt in your conclusions already, which is kind of why, like I said, why I was disappointed by this, and maybe why, as we said a number of times, the whole film is a microcosm of religious debate. And maybe I should have expected this because that's kind of like the final trap card that, atheists or whoever in these debates pull out is like, it's just the opioid of the masses, man. They're just trying to control you. They're trying to control everybody in the world. And you're just falling under a specific power structure because they told you to believe this, that, and the other thing. I was like, yeah. I mean, that's the conclusion that we have to end at, of course. But so maybe I shouldn't be too mad at it. Maybe I should have seen it coming from a certain regard. But to me, it's just I don't want to use the word elementary, but I can't think of a expected outcome in any regard, but like I guess I should have seen that coming because I don't know where else you could have taken it outside of going completely off the rails, which is why I was like kind of almost hoping that we'd go down the simulacrum android thing. I was like, oh, that's fucking crazy if he is just a total whack job, if he is just like a QAnon, like we live in a simulation thing.
Or it's a 10 Cloverfield Lane thing where he's actually
right. Yeah. But no, we do the thing, which is, the point that Beck and Woods are trying to make, that like ultimately these are structures to control people. I mean, there's a reason why all the people he has trapped in cages are women, particularly, controlling people in specific minority groups, specific groups of people that, that the person in charge deems must be controlled. It is like like I said, the conclusion that atheistic debate leads to always. Not that it's wrong, and I agree with it, but that I was just hoping for something maybe a little different, a little deeper, potentially.
Yeah, and I think that maybe our slight unsatisfaction with dissatisfaction. That's a good. With the note that this film lands on. Comes from this being a topic that we are generally interested in. We've heard a lot of these debates before in the past. Ultimately, as we both said here, it kind of does confirm our worldview, at least the way that we understand the conclusion this movie comes to.
Right.
But also, then the most devoutly religious character of the film ends up defeating the villain and escapes. And then there is this very last moment. I'm not really sure what it means. She escapes and she's in a forest, she's in a meadow or whatever, and she sees a butterfly land on her finger, but then she doesn't. That's like a hallucination or something. So is this what you were getting at? Of like you don't even really know?
Well, I think
escape?
I think she escapes, but I think that final moment is pretty. It's clearly like symbolic of her losing her faith, because. She at the beginning of the movie, she was like, "When I'm dead, and when in the afterlife, I'm gonna become a butterfly, and I'm gonna land on my loved one's finger to let them know that it's me, and that the afterlife is real." And she thinks she sees it, and then she snaps into reality, and there's nothing there. I think that's what it is.
I mean, I guess I viewed it more as not her snapping into reality, but the movie cutting to reality.
Sure.
In that she is seeing the butterfly on her finger because that's what like helps confirm her belief, and that's what's causing her some sort of comfort in this moment. I do think that, again, I'm someone who thinks about this kind of stuff a lot. I think this movie is one of the best examples I've seen of covering all sorts of different viewpoints and topics on the debate of religion and the comfort that it brings to people, but the control that it also is a part of it, and the bad history and the good history of all these things. And that moment, to me, read more in a comforting way of the comfort that her religion brings to her. And she sees this, but then, again, to sort of the confirmation of my biases, then what I saw as the cutting to reality and not seeing the butterfly on her finger was the filmmakers communicating to me that it's not actually true.
Yeah,
it's just bringing her comfort. I don't really know. But again, I think that's what makes this film, because it's explicit in its themes, but it is open enough, because this conversation is open enough, and it's a debate that's been had for thousands and thousands of years and will be had for thousands and thousands more, that it's open enough to allow for different interpretations and allow for people, if you are someone of faith and you are watching these two mostly devout young women tear down and argue against this this anti-theistic guy, and you see one of them escape and see the butterfly on her finger, you're like, yeah, look, she did it. It was her belief. It was her faith and the comfort that it brings her and the focus that allowed her to have that allowed her to get out of this. So I don't know. I just think it's, even though I guess I personally would have wanted it to be a little more specific, I understand why this vague conversation, when you boil it down to a film, has to have a semi-ambiguous ending.
Yeah. Three things. Two of them have to do with the ending, and then I think we should wrap up. Sure. I'll go the end things first. I think I got the abandoning of faith thing based on the final look that Chloe East has in that moment. I think that's the thing we see right before cut to credits is the look on her face, and to me, I interpreted that as it's not really there.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Two, wanted to point out that if you want to go with your interpretation, then that is very similar to another A24 horror film with themes of religion, Saint Maud, which ends with a very similar thing, where she believes, the main character believes that she is ascending to heaven or whatever, that she is divine, that she has been chosen by God, and then right before we snap to the credits, it's less than a second of actually she's just self-immolated herself. She's burning alive on a beach, and that's the credits. So very interesting that
interesting parallel.
Yeah, interesting parallel there. Third thing, unrelated to anything that we've talked about for like the past 10 minutes, I'd say.
Great.
In this entire review. Hugh Grant does the worst Jar Jar Binks impression I've ever heard in this movie.
Yeah, he did.
Because he talks about how the Bible also follows like the Phantom Menace plot, and he's like, can you imagine people in the future looking at Jar Jar Binks as a serious religious figure? And then he tries to do a Jar Jar impression, does a line that's like, I don't think Jar Jar says, and does not sound like Jar Jar at all.
No, it's funny.
It's very funny though.
Well, because this movie does have a sense of humor,
and
I think that is what helps to keep it grounded and engaging and not too dour. I think that watching Hugh Grant's performance, and he delivers little jokes, and they have these funny interactions where it's uncomfortable, but they're smiling, and there's a tinge of humor to it, especially as the audience. I think it's a part of this movie that just helped keep me like a smile on my face. And I'm like, oh, this conversation is interesting. These people are interesting. He has a in kind of the way that I get like a twisted smile on my face while I'm watching Saw. There's a humor to it.
Absolutely.
And I think another element of that plays into why I think this movie is successful for me in particular is this movie has very intricate production design that I think is really, really well done. I think all the craft of this movie is there. The sound design is fantastic. The production design is fantastic. The cinematography is fantastic. And watching the ridiculousness of this guy's plan be revealed, and the 20 doors that she opens down there, you're like, that doesn't even make any goddamn sense. And like he like twists a thing, and like sheets start to move, and a projector comes out of the wall, and you're like, this guy's got gizmos everywhere. This is insane. But I love that stuff.
He's got like a Pee-wee's Playhouse kind of room.
He does.
But I
just think it's fantastic.
But for convincing people that God isn't real or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's very good. Tucker, I'm going to go a 7.5 out of 10.
I'm going to go a 9.2 out of 10. I raised my opinion on this movie as I was thinking about it. I really think that it's very special. I think that the themes that it boils into are something that I'm very interested in, and I think it covers those very well. And it's grounded by fantastic craft and 3 core fantastic performances. Maybe my favorite performance from Hugh Grant, who's a guy I've seen in a lot of stuff. I just think this is a home run.
I stay vindicated in as Tucker when I walked out of the movie. I was like, Tucker's gonna really like this movie. I can feel it. And then I texted you the same thing like the next day or whatever. But there you have it, folks. Our review of Heretic. Hope you enjoyed. Let us know what you thought of the movie. This is not one that's being particularly well received by general audiences. I saw it got like a C+ cinema score, which is kind of more standard for a horror movie. But we've seen some horror movies get good cinema scores this year. So anyway, thank you so much. We'll be reviewing more new releases in the coming weeks. Stay tuned. Bye bye.